Let's bring in our panel of experts now. Fatima Goss Graves, the president of the National Women's Law Center. Diane Swan, chief economist and managing director at Grant Thornton. And Lorena Yee, chief diversity and inclusion officer for McKinsey. And Diane, let me begin with you. This Friday jobs report really was a downside surprise. How do you explain it?
Well, there's not a lot of ways to explain it. It really was disappointing. And we did see a lot of leisure and hospitality jobs come back that more than accounted for the job gains. We lost jobs in manufacturing as chip production idled, production plants in the vehicle sector. But it's still, no matter how you cut it, it was not the kind of number we were looking for. We were hoping to see more than 1 million jobs created. And a lot of the momentum that we saw in the high frequency data just didn't show up in the data. So it could be a fluke, but the bottom line is there are a lot of hurdles to people coming back into the labor force, as was noted already. How many women in particular have dropped out since February of 2020, just unable to participate in the labor market in ways they once did. Yes, we're paying them to do that in some cases as well. If they quit their job, they don't get unemployment insurance. But I do think it's important to understand how unique this situation has been, not only in terms of the recession affecting women's current earnings, but also their earnings potential and the ability for them to provide for their children. The reason developing economies focus on women when they develop is because they pay it forward with their children like no one else.
Lorena, these numbers for women really are staggering. Some economists are calling this pandemic downturn the she-cession.
Well, absolutely. And for companies, the biggest tax has been on working mothers. Just take over the course of the pandemic, we saw that women overall, 1 in 4, said that they were thinking about stepping back or stepping out. It's a tremendous number. But for working mothers, that number was 1 in 3. And when we asked men and women, when we asked fathers and mothers, how is work from home going? Fathers said, actually, we feel very effective working. Over 70% of them said that they felt that work from home was effective. And over 70% of them said that they had a positive impact on their well-being. Well, guess what? For working mothers, that is not the case. Little over 40% of them felt that this was a positive outcome.
And if Fatima, we showed some of this criticism earlier in the program, some saying that it's the incentives in the stimulus plan that are keeping people at home. What's your response to that?
Well, my response is that care is what is keeping people at home and pushing women out of the workforce. And I think what the latest job numbers are telling us is that we won't have a real recovery unless we also attend to the care crisis in this country. And it's no longer this idea that care is some sort of personal problem that people are either good at or not good at. I think what we have learned is that care is essential not just for families and individuals, but for businesses and our economic recovery.
That question of care is so central, Diane Swan. People want talking about paid family leave, expanded child care, but one of the big questions is who should fit the bill, taxpayers or businesses?
Well, it's interesting because I remember the late 1990s and having some of these discussions, and women's participation in the labor force actually peaked in the late 1990s and 2000. We've seen a decline since then. And even before we entered the pandemic, we saw we were lagging in women's participation other major countries like Japan. And I think that's something that gets lost in translation, is how much this has been a rising problem, the care issue we had. Back in the latter part of the 1990s, there was a lot of experimentation as the labor market tightened for women to share jobs, for childcare at work. Those kinds of changes and those kinds of solutions disappeared as we moved into the 2000s. And I think we need to come at this at a holistic way. There are funds in the $1.9 trillion package that was just passed for childcare, but many of the childcare facilities have closed. Many of the traditional networks that people relied on with their parents during the pandemic were severed because of fear of contagion. And we still need to get access to vaccines to those people who do want to get back to work and want their parents to be able to help. So there's such a holistic way we have to look at this, that it's not just a business problem, it's not just a government problem, it's a societal problem. And without women in the workforce, we cannot grow like we want to. It's leaving money on the table. This is just not the way that anyone thrives. It's how we all get the pie a little smaller and get a smaller share of it.
And Lorena, Diane hits on one of the possible answers, more flexibility in the workplace, especially for women.
Well, absolutely. And companies don't need to wait for policy. They can lean forward in terms of bringing mothers back to the workforce and making sure that the mothers who are still in the workforce don't leave. So there are a couple of things that companies can do. The first thing is they don't have to snap back to pre-COVID as we do return to work. First of all, this has been a huge innovation if you think of the silver lining in terms of flexibility. Who would have thought that you don't have to be in the office from 9 to 5, 5 days a week? You could actually have a hybrid where you're maybe 2 or 3 days a week and where both mothers and fathers could actually balance their home life and the responsibilities there as well as being high performers at work. Another thing that companies can absolutely
Go ahead.
do is to take on diversity hiring. So this is a huge opportunity to say, let's actually refashion what the workforce looks like to reach our aspirations on diversity. If you're not tethered to a location, you can hire from anywhere in the United States. So while we see a lot of challenges here for working mothers, I think that companies can start to turn this around as opportunities, especially for women of color who are more likely to have faced taking over all the household duties and more likely to have been the single breadwinners.
Well, let's pick up on that, Fatima. This recession, this she-cession, has hit women of color especially hard.
That's absolutely right. What we know is that the unemployment rate, especially for Black and Latino women, is basically double what it was before the pandemic. And for Black and Latino moms, we're talking about a rate that's about 10%. And so as we think about where we are in this recovery, we need to understand that we won't have fully recovered until those groups have fully recovered. And that requires us attending to the care crisis. It also ensures that we're thinking about the jobs that people are going back into. If those jobs were paying tremendously low wages, maybe a minimum wage that hasn't been increased in over a decade, that means that these families are going to be coming back without a net, without an egg to build upon, without any foundation after this last year. So we have to be talking about the wages and the quality of those jobs as well.
Very illuminating discussion. We have a lot of challenges ahead. We all know that, and you guys have helped shine a light on some of the problems. Thank you all very much. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.